Good morning, good afternoon, and
Good evening. Welcome to R.W.A, Radicals with Age. My name is Pancho.
my name is Jesse.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, November 6th, 2024, the day after Donald Trump sadly got reelected. First thought that comes to my mind is the statement that FDR made to Congress in December 1941 after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And FDR said that that date, December 7th, 1941, would be a date that would live in infamy. And unfortunately, I'm going to believe that yesterday, Tuesday, November 5th, 2024, is also a date that will live in infamy. It could very well mean the end of the American experiment. Donald Trump has said that he's going to go after his enemies. He's going to throw the Constitution in the garbage, and he's going to do whatever he wants. And I think that that is a sad day. One of the things that he certainly will do, that he did the first time he was president, was to enact enormous tax cuts for the rich. One of the things that that will result in is that there will be more millionaires and there will be more billionaires. And that is our segue into today's topic, which is billionaires. So I have two questions for you, Jesse. The first is, are you still feeling optimistic after the election? And the second question is, why did you want to do a show on billionaires?
Very cool. Well, let me start with the second question and then work my way back. The reason I wanted to do a episode about billionaires is because last Tuesday, our weekly R.W.A Zoom, which if you are watching this program and are not joining us on Tuesday nights, we would love to have you come join us. It's free to come and join. We talk about the episode. It's just a community space where we can gather and continue to practice love and optimism and building community. And in the discussion we had, the topic of billionaires came up, and is it possible to be an ethical billionaire? We had some disagreement amongst community members, and I thought it would be a really interesting episode to do. But to work backwards, yes, I'm still feeling optimistic. I am feeling a little bit bruised because I was very confident, obviously falsely, that Kamala Harris was going to win this election. I thought that Donald Trump and his cronies were going to be calling for election fraud and trying all sorts of trickery and shenanigans in order to steal the election back. But that didn't happen. From my last glance, Donald Trump also won the popular vote, which was another thing that I've talked about on this show about how the Republican Party has struggled immensely to get the popular vote. But I don't want to talk too much about the election yet. I'm sure we're going to have more episodes. Obviously, of a Trump presidency, there's going to be no shortage of things to talk about politically. So for now, I want to focus on optimism because yes, the answer is yes. And the reason why primarily I am still optimistic is because I just saw one of the best films I have ever seen. And that is saying a lot. Some other films that are some of my favorites, The Breakfast Club, it's a great movie. The Matrix taught me a lot about the world. Alice in Wonderland, Lion King, Network, Truman Show. There's lots of great films out there, but this film, The Wild Robot, is one of the best films I've ever seen. And though I am more or less a gay man, I'm not crazy about kids' movies all that much. I find myself usually being a bit more, I don't know, fatalistic, and kids' movies can be kind of lame for me. This movie is fantastic. Dad, I know you haven't seen it yet, but I highly, highly recommend it. I think it's kind of Marxist, actually, which was really surprising and really cool. Have you heard about this movie much?
Only what you have told me about it.
Fair. So I will not spoil this for anybody, but let me say a couple of things about this film. Just very briefly, the story is about this near future AI robot. If you've seen like the movie I, Robot, same sort of premise where you have robots essentially becoming like butlers or housekeepers and nannies and stuff. Their job is to serve humans and to make their lives easier. But this robot, we find there must have been some issue with the transportation system. And so this big robot got not delivered to a home, but ended up in the middle of the forest. And so this, semi sentient robot wakes up and is trying and is doing its basic programming, which consists of finding a human and having a task to perform, whether that's taking care of the kids or cleaning the house or what have you. But of course, in the middle of the forest with only nothing but animals, this robot is struggling to find a purpose. And it's only after a crazy series of events that this robot, the protagonist Roz, comes into contact with this baby bird and becomes its mother because something happens to the family. And so it's a really fascinating movie and it talks so much about purpose. What is this robot's purpose? What is the purpose of all animals? And essentially your purpose is to do your animal kind of things. Or the robot's purpose is to serve or to complete its task or to serve its host. There are almost no humans in this entire movie. So the biggest takeaway for me in the sort of Marxist reading that I had of it is what truly is the purpose of human beings. It seems like right now, the purpose of human beings is to make money, to work a job, to have a family, to sort of continue the human story by, having children and procreating and that kind of stuff. I believe, and this is why it comes back to optimism. If anyone was like, where's the fuck is the optimism part? I believe that the purpose of human beings, sure, is to, continue to live on this planet. But I think the true purpose of human beings with our advanced intelligence should be to be the caretakers for this planet and to care for it in the most harmonious way. And that means not polluting so that we're destroying habitats and ecosystems of other animals, not polluting the air so that other animals can't breathe, not destroying water supply so that other animals, including humans, can't drink water. And so I have a quote from the film, which I think is actually the tagline of the film. Sometimes to survive, you must become more than you were programmed to be. And if anyone hasn't seen episode 4, please go back and watch episode 4 because I talk a lot about how humans are programmed by our biology and our social systems. And I think right now, again, we are not destined to work 9 to 5s. We are programmed by the system that we live in. And right now, the system programs us to be greedy, to say all of the things we've said in episodes before, to not care about, to only care about mine and my family or whatever it might be, my small circle. If we changed our systems, we could change our programming. That makes me optimistic. I still believe in my heart of hearts that whether we replace capitalism with socialism, or if we make some big reforms that lifts the standard of living in the world immensely, either of those could have massive changes to our programming, if you will. And so that is why I'm optimistic.
So I'll throw in here a quote from one of my intellectual heroes, Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian communist in the early 20th century. And the phrase that he coined is pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So
Mm.
you look out at the world and you see that things are shitty, and that makes you pessimistic when you see the conditions that are existing. But you still have to maintain optimism of the will, that you, even if things are shitty, you're going to do what you need to do in your particular realm to help make things better. And just as an aside, on yesterday, seems to me this is the perfect time to take that quote in. We are all very pessimistic about what happened yesterday, But the proper response to that is not to give up and say Trump is back in office, the world is going to be fucked and there's nothing we can do. We just have to be optimistic and fight harder.
And as a aside as well, and as a reach across the aisle, I'm going to be optimistic too that maybe there's some credence to what, not what Trump has been saying, but what his supporters have been saying, that they think he is going to elevate America back to a place of security and I can't do it. I tried. It's too hard to be disingenuous. I want to be optimistic that things are not going to be as bad, that this full-fledged fascism and martial law isn't going to come into place. And I really hope that it doesn't. We'll have to wait and see. It certainly happens around the world. We talked about it a ton 2 episodes ago about the many, many similarities Trump has with other fascists around the world.
Unfortunately, there are some things that we can be pretty sure are going to happen. He's going to probably eliminate all of our support in Europe, including Ukraine, including NATO, and he certainly is not going to support any Palestinian cause. He has already said that his boy Bibi can do whatever he wants. And I think that that will be to wipe out Palestine as we know it and have Israel take over that entire piece of land, which of course makes the phrase from the river to the sea quite ironic because people want to attribute that statement to the Palestinians as a way to wipe out the Israelis, when in fact the opposite is what is happening.
Exactly. And it's not just Gaza, it's the West Bank and possibly all
Exactly.
of Lebanon. So who knows where this is going to go. So I did think about it while you were saying that. I can be optimistic that I am optimistic that in these next couple of years, many Trump supporters, open-minded ones at least, are going to continue to come to terms, and maybe even some centrist Democrats as well are going to come to terms with both parties are deeply problematic and some big change is necessary. Because as much as I wanted her to win, clearly Kamala Harris was not electable enough. And yes, you can speak to racists who wouldn't vote for her. You could speak to misogynists who didn't vote for her. You can speak to you and I, pro-Palestinian folks who didn't vote for her. But that is not the main issue. The main issue is not getting enough people to turn out, right? What's it? Something like 170 million people vote. And so you have certainly there are more people who don't vote than who do. And somebody needs to reach these people.
The last statistic that I saw, the percentage of eligible voters in the United States who vote is in the low 60s, whereas a place like Australia, it's 99%. There's two things happening there. One is most countries have elections on the weekends, not on days when people have to work. Or if you're going to have it on a weekday, it should be a holiday and people shouldn't have to work. In Australia, people are required by law to vote unless they have an acceptable, very good reason. And you can be fined if you don't vote. And so they have a 99% turnout rate.
Which is super important. That's what democracy is about. We can, and it would be interesting to see this year if everybody who's, of course, above 18 voted, how the election would go. Maybe Trump would win by even more of a landslide, but I'd still rather have that than so many people so apathetic. And it's not just people not voting, it's all of the massive amounts of disenfranchisement, which starts with, felons not being allowed to vote, but the more sneaky things like the gerrymandering and stuff like that, and making like the point you just said, if you work multiple jobs and you don't have time to get away or wait in line for hours, you're not gonna vote, especially if you think this isn't that important to me.
And I
Um,
think that was one of the strategies that they used this time that they didn't use last time. Last time, they complained after the fact. This time, what they did is they did all kinds of stuff beforehand, purging voter rolls so that the number of people who could vote was lessened. And I think that that's a lesson that Trump learned after the first time. And so he had this stuff going on all over the country to eliminate voters.
Exactly. Well, I think that's enough
Let's
about the
yes,
election for
let's
now.
let's segue into our topic.
Absolutely. So, billionaires. And the first thing, which we now have a habit of doing, is defining things. And I think before we even have a conversation about billionaires, it is very important to understand what we are talking about. So I took a couple of notes because $1 billion, or just the number 1 billion, is so big that our brains can't really quite fathom it. So here's an example: 1 million seconds. And just to think about it for a second, like $1 million would be great. I don't have anywhere near $1 million in my bank account. $1 million would be pretty cool. We're talking about billionaires, though, today, not millionaires. So 1 million seconds would last 11 and a half days. It's pretty long, a million seconds, a week and a half. A billion seconds? Do you have a guess, Dad?
Months.
30, almost 32 years.
Whoa.
A billion seconds is 31 years and 8 months. So a million seconds, 11 days, 30, almost, I'm just over 32 years old. So I've basically been alive for a billion seconds. 11 days, you could give or take. If I went back, if I got, zapped through a time machine 11 days ago, I'd be like, all right, whatever. But you have to remember, some of these folks don't just have $1 billion. Jeff Bezos, for example, has $204 billion, which means if you were to go to a job and make $1 million an hour, I imagine you don't make $1 million an hour at your job.
Uh, Close, but not quite.
Right. So not only would you make $1 million an hour for a 40-hour week for 52 weeks a year, you'd have to work for 98 years to amass the wealth that Jeff Bezos has. 98 years at $1 million an hour. Personally, I'd probably work a couple weeks and then be like, I think that's good.
Then
Right?
retire.
40 million a week, maybe just 1 week, maybe just that 11 days. I think if I was making $1 million an hour, I would work for like 11 and a half days and call it good. I'd work for a million seconds and yeah, be chilling. So I just wanted to frame the discussion that way. This is not just a lot, this is a stupid amount of money. A stupid, stupid, stupid amount of money. So the first thing that comes up when we talk about billionaires is like, why do they exist in the first place? I would make the argument right now that that amount of money, $1 million an hour for 98 years, is not necessary, is not needed. You don't need to make that much money. I'm sorry. Anyone who thinks they should, or that anyone should make $1 million an hour, fight me. I don't know what to say. It's not necessary. So then we come to taxation. I did some research on whitehouse.gov. This was in 2021, so the Biden administration. So maybe it's biased, but I don't think so. I think both parties are pretty good at helping out billionaires. They did a study looking at the 400 richest families in the US, and between 2010 and 2018, they paid on average 8.2% in taxes. The average American pays somewhere between 12 and 14%. The first question is why? Why are our top richest families paying less than you and I, or someone who makes even less money than we do? And the biggest reason is dividends and stock sales. There is this big, big loophole that is called stepped up basis. And I had never actually heard of this. And I dabble in economics, I do accounting professionally. And so I had never heard of this, so I imagine many of the listeners haven't either. So here's how it goes: you have a stock in a company. This is, of course, how Warren Buffett has made tons of his money, right? That he's just made good investments, and therefore his company's stock has increased. Then he does this sort of shifty thing where he will sell the stocks for a lot of money and then wait till they drop a little bit and then buy them back, only to sell them again. Stepped up basis, what you do is you never sell your stock. So maybe you bought your shares at $5 a share. I'm sure this is an example for Bill Gates, right? He started this company, has really, really cheap shares. They, of course, over time skyrocket in price. If you, rather than sell these stocks, if you pass them to an heir, you pay a big old bagel in capital gains, meaning If I paid $5 for, let's keep it real simple, for 100 shares, right? $500 is the net worth of these shares that I bought. $5, 100 shares, $500. But then instead of them being $5 a share, they're 5,000 a share. And so now it's I just lost, how many did I say? 100. So 500,000, I went from $500 to 500,000, and I could sell those and make $500,000. Well, make 500,000 minus 500 and then pay the taxes on that difference. But if instead I just wait till I die and give those to my children or an heir, no taxes. You just made almost $500,000 other than the $500 investment, and you pay no taxes on it. And so that is how some of these wealthy families have continued to amass massive wealth and not pay any taxes on it. So that is stepped up basis. I thought it'd be kind of fun since last week we did our sports goats. I thought it'd be fun this week to sort of do the greatest billionaires of all time, which means that they're sort of the worst ones of all time, because to be a billionaire, as I've started to lay out, I think, is pretty messed up.
Before you get there, I
Please.
want to throw in that earlier in the United States, the tax rates were significantly higher than they are now. And we should also point out the difference between what happens in the United States and what happens in Europe, that they have a higher tax rate, but as a result of that higher tax rate, the public good is served. People don't have to worry about healthcare costs. They don't have to worry about daycare costs. You don't see the kind of homelessness or houselessness in Europe as you see in the United States. We need to think about what is for the greater good of the people. And when you have somebody like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett, and their secretary pays a higher tax rate than they do, there's something totally screwed up about the way we are doing things.
Totally agree. And I was going to get to that point later, but I think this was a great time to bring it up. Yeah, there are billionaires across the world. There are some in Europe, but I think it's something like there are 2,000 globally and like 750 are in the US. So we have almost half of them. So it is, of course, uniquely American. But speaking of billionaires, and actually speaking of optimism, I want to start with Bill Gates, because when I started doing this research, I actually found that Bill Gates has done his own little documentary thing on Netflix, and he even brought your boy Bernie Sanders on there. And so to give it a shout out, it's called What's Next. It's on Netflix. I skipped the first three episodes. I know you did not.
I watched I watched the first three episodes, and it was all about the uses of AI. So it wasn't really relevant to the topic, but I did think that the fourth episode is definitely worth watching.
Agreed. I thought it was fascinating and sort of, I'm still very confused, like how this even came about. So it's called episode four. It's episode four, entitled Can You Be Too Rich? And there was a number of very interesting things from it. And I'd like to start with a quote from Mr. Gates himself, which goes like this: We'd like for everyone to have certain basics: healthcare, decent education, decent housing. So, how do we design the right systems so we can raise that basic level that everybody has available? And I couldn't agree more, Mr. Gates. We do need to design systems in a way so that everybody's standard of living is lifted. And one of the first big examples that I think of is food inequality. Man, I write too small. So, or I guess homelessness is the one I looked up, not food insecurity. So we talked about, how much money these people should be taxed and how much money they have. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the US, we could finish homelessness or unhousedness, to be more PC. I know you tried to do that too. $20 billion, which sounds like a lot. As we just said, 1 billion is quite a lot, but 20 billion, well, wait a second. Jeff Bezos is worth 204. So if we tax that 10%, there's that 20 billion. Oh, crazy. So, but that's of course his net worth, not his yearly salary or income, but whatever. But I have an example. Currently, in the United States, there is 140, and this is from the show actually. So Bill Gates, there's lots of good things in it, but I wrote this down and I double checked that it's true. $140 billion a year in unclaimed welfare in the United States. So if you're a right-leaning person who doesn't like welfare programs, fine. We already have welfare programs on the books. So unless you're going to change those laws, the existing welfare $140 billion that's unclaimed in food stamps and unemployment insurance and earned tax credits, all this stuff, this money that we've allocated for. And
And why was it unclaimed? It was unclaimed because there was a two-page form you had to fill out, but there was 100 pages of directions you had to read on how to fill it out. And obviously, most people who are struggling day to day do not have time to read a 100-page manual on how to fill out a two-page document. And interestingly enough, there was the segment where they asked Bill Gates to fill it out, and he made a $5,000 mistake.
he had all the resources to do it. And I think that was what was really interesting to me is the 2 pages. It seems as though they almost make it look easy so that you think, oh, I can do this. It's only 2 pages. It's only a few things. And Bill Gates, came into it. I mean, he's smart and he's rich. So he came into it kind of cocky. He's like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And like you said, 5,000, he was off $5,000. So yeah, that's just one crazy, crazy example. I do want to give him a bit of praise because, again, if anyone's not clear, my position is that billionaires are victims in the system like everybody else. Yes, they have all this wealth that they amass, they can do anything they want, but also they don't live in complete bubbles. And it's clear when Bill Gates talks about it, he sort of doesn't really want to be a billionaire because he knows the stigma that's attached to it. He knows that all of this money could be better spent. And so it's kind of like my approach, and it seems like his too, don't hate the player, hate the game. Him and Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett says it a lot too. I like my stock shouldn't be this much. Like I shouldn't be making this much money. They have that, the pledge to give a bunch of money when they die, which is potentially too little, too late, especially with I didn't watch episode 5. Episode 5, the teaser he put in episode 4 is about how, technology can more or less like cure tons of diseases. So who knows? Bill Gates might live to 300 years old and we're never going to see any of that money.
Yeah, and I think that was a really important point in that episode that, yeah, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have pledged to give away most of their money, but when are they going to give it away? And to whom are they going to give it away? One of the things that was pointed out in the documentary is lots of people who give money away do it as a kind of ego thing. And so they want their name on a museum or on some college building or whatever. And that's not helping the world to become a better place.
And there's still this phenomenon which he didn't mention, which is where I did some extra research. So there's a couple of things, and I went and found this because I quote this study all the time. So I really think if you're interested in this at all, you should check it out. It was a 2012 paper written by Paul Piff from UC Berkeley entitled Higher Social Class Predicts Increased Unethical Behavior. So there's some really interesting things on the subconscious level that they found that the wealthiest people can't even recognize facial features and emotions from from lower class citizens, that their levels of empathy go down the more money they amass. And again, that's not a good thing. Bill Gates, if you ask Bill Gates, he doesn't want to be less ethical just because he makes more money, but that is this weird psychological phenomenon. So, according to Business Insider, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos donated less than 1% of their income in 2021 when the stat was taken. So that just says so much, right? And yes, 1% of Elon Musk's income is still probably more than I made the whole year. And so then obviously way more than what I donated, but it doesn't matter. It's the principle, right? Even the Christians say your tithe should be, I don't think they say half. I can't remember, a quarter?
10%, 10.
10? There you go. So 10. So even, and I think they're both religious in some way, but again, they're not even doing that basic thing. And again, the amount of money, if had they donated 10%, 20%, I think it's pretty close. I'd have to double check, but the lower your income, the higher percentage you donate. I think it gets close to like 30% people give away. A couple of other things from the study: you're more likely to break the law, lie, cheat, and steal, right? So these are all obviously things that aren't good. We don't want people breaking the law, lying, cheating, and stealing. This is a phenomenon that happens the more money you amass, the more successful you are in this game of capitalism, the worse your social behavior becomes. So again, I don't think we should go around saying fuck Elon and fuck Jeff Bezos and fuck Oprah. It may be somewhat true, but it's limited thinking. It's the system. It's not these people. They didn't write the rules to this game.
Trump is talking about hiring Elon to help deal with economic issues. And Elon has said that he wants to trim 1/3 of the federal budget. And how is that going to happen? That's going to happen by getting rid of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act. And think about how many people that is going to negatively affect, who will no longer have health care. And as we have said on more than one occasion, things like health care and education, they should be rights. They should not be privileges that are afforded only to the few.
And actually, before I get to another billionaire goat, I wanted to touch on this quote that was put into the show. So one of the hardest things about the documentary was the disingenuous and outright fraudulent framing of capital or of socialism and communism. That the expert he got to talk about socialism and communism was Mitt fucking Romney. And then this guy, Thomas Friedman, who I'm not super familiar with.
He writes editorials for the New York Times quite frequently, and he is not on my list of favorite journalists.
That was, I mean, from these couple of things that he said, that was my thing too. Though he did put this sort of thing. So I want you to address this quote of his I wrote, which is socialism makes everybody equally poor. Capitalism makes everybody unequally rich. What is your response to that quote of his?
I would disagree with the first part and agree with the second part. Socialism is not designed to make everyone equally poor. The whole purpose of socialism is so that there aren't poor people and that everybody has the means that they need in order to be able to not just survive, but to survive at a decent level. Capitalism is designed so that there are going to be people on the bottom and people on the top. I mean, the basic difference is socialism is about we and capitalism is about me.
And will you say a bit more on that? Because this is one of those myths that I hear all the time. So you just said socialism isn't designed to do that, but why does it always go that way? Why does socialism always become everybody being poor and always being fucked up? Can you address that? Because I hear it all the time.
I actually don't think that that is true. Now, the United States has always said that the US democratic form of government is the best there is. And it's interesting that when other forms of government arise, you would think that the United States would be happy because those other forms of government are doomed to fail. But exactly the opposite happens. So when we have socialism in Chile, for example, the first response is to send in the CIA and take out Allende. If we have a better form of government, then any kind of socialism is bound to fail. Why are we still having a blockade of Cuba? So I just completely disagree with that. And we haven't really had a form of a socialist government. Communism, as practiced in Russia, was really a form of state capitalism. It wasn't really communism. There are countries in Europe that are more socialist leaning, but they're sort of a blend of socialism and capitalism. So there hasn't really been in the history of the world a truly socialist form of government. The United States seems to be afraid that such a form of government would be beneficial to people, and so it goes out of its way to get rid of them when they pop up. We are responsible for what happened in Chile, what happened in Guatemala, what happened in Iran, etc., etc., etc.
Can you say a little bit more about the Scandinavian thing? Is it that these countries like a Finland are afraid of socialism, or is it possible that democratic socialism is just a better system right now?
I think that, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, I think that Scandinavian countries are trying to have it both ways. They're trying to allow capitalism to a certain degree to happen, but by taxing people at a significantly higher rate than happens in the United States, they make sure that that capitalism is used for the social benefit of people. So when you have higher taxes, then everybody has access to healthcare. Every company has free daycare, et cetera, et cetera. You know, when you don't have to worry about the quality of your life, you are going to be much happier and you're going to be a much more productive member of society. And again, everybody gets helped as opposed to just me gets helped. And I think that in Europe, that is part of the mental mindset. It's who we are as Europeans, that we don't just think about ourselves, we think about what is of benefit to the greater society. I think that in a completely capitalist country such as the United States, you're not taught to think about the greater good. An interesting example of that is taxes to support public school. People who don't have kids in public school or their kids are older will often vote against taxes to support the school system because they say, why should I pay to help make the schools better because I don't have kids in school? And again, in that example, they're just thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about the greater good. The greater good is to have quality education, and everybody benefits when we have quality education, but people don't think about things that way.
And I would argue they're thinking about themselves in a reductive way and not a holistic way. Because think about it, educated people is going to improve your life. Educated people are less likely to commit crimes, are more likely to get jobs that help out your neighborhood, raise the value in your property. So it's not even that people are just thinking individually, they're thinking in this way that is so myopic, they're not even realizing how they are voting against maybe their own selfish self-interest. I think this is a great segue, though, to one of the billionaires I want to highlight. And I'm curious your thoughts here. Of course, he's a billionaire, so I have many problems with him. However, Mark Cuban was featured in that Bill Gates episode. I actually really liked this quote and the sort of ethic of what he said, which was get stinking rich and then pay your taxes, of like his idea of the American dream. And of course, he also sort of bashes socialism because he says that, oh, the American dream is this most unique thing, and without the American dream, innovation wouldn't happen, which is bullshit. It's mostly technology that has made these innovations in our society. It's not capitalism, it's not America. It's that technology is continuing to increase. There's no reason why a society where people aren't desperate that they can't do well. A great example I like to think to bring us back to last week is sports. For a long time, there was this argument that kids from the hood are the best at sports. They're a little bit more desperate and therefore they want it more and they do better. Well, what have we seen now in terms of like the Olympics? You need a shitload of money if you want to go to the Olympics, especially in some of these more special sports. But even take something as basic as like swimming, where if you have access to a pool, but you could have a public pool, you could go to a school, a decent enough public high school that has a swim team. There's plenty of like middle to low income, black and brown kids that could access this. But no, you need that high level coaching. You need the diet and nutrition plan. You need the accompanying weightlifting. You need the opportunities to travel for all these competitions and meets. It's a financial thing. You're not going to find many gold medal winners amongst the lowest of the low income. Even in these African countries, there's a lot of investment over there for these long distance runners. Yeah, maybe it was a thing in the past, but now it takes some coin if you want to be an elite athlete. And so I don't think if we had a society where people weren't desperate about where their next meal or where their roof is going to come from, that all of a sudden all innovation is lost. What do you think about QB from, I remember being a little kid and like him being so featured in like Mavericks games and stuff. What do you think about his sort of approach, which I thought was very a nice change of pace from the other billionaires that he's like, this is the game, I'm going to play the game, but I'm not going to cheat. I'm going to make my money and I'm going to send, I think it was what he like they show him writing like a $200 million check to the IRS, like at the
No, it
tax.
was more like I thought it was 500,000,
We'll have to
but
check that. I thought it was more. I thought it was hundreds of millions of dollars.
whatever. The
Sure.
the the point is that he is a big entrepreneur. He has made tons of money. He owns the Dallas Mavericks.
I think he's selling them actually now. But anyway,
Yeah, but they were good enough to get to the NBA Finals last year, so he has the money to pay quality players
and employees, the whole organization.
and the entire organization. And obviously, it's a successful organization. And when they showed him writing his check, he said, "Oh my God, I'm writing this gigantically huge check to the IRS, but that's my duty as a citizen. And my writing this check is going to be able to allow the government to do the things that it needs to do in order to help people." So that part of him I thought was pretty okay. I do disagree with him about the whole notion of the American dream. I do not believe that the American dream is equally accessible to everybody. And of course, the perfect example of that is how African Americans were treated after the end of the Civil War. People were promised 40 acres and a mule and got nothing. Meanwhile, at the same time that Black folks were getting nothing, the United States was giving away land in like Oklahoma and other places in the Midwest, giving away land for free, helping those people to do with various kinds of subsidies, some of which in farms exist to this day, giving people an economic push in order to be able to succeed and in order to be able to achieve, quote unquote, the American dream.
There is
But
one stipulation to that. They didn't just get the land for free. They did have to murder any indigenous person that was on said
well,
land.
precisely, but they don't count. Lots of people want to come here from other countries because they believe that they can be successful here in ways that they couldn't be in their home countries. And in a lot of cases, that might be true. On the other hand, there's lots of stories of people coming to the United States who were doctors in China or Vietnam, let's say, and they come to the
Nigeria.
United States, yeah, and they come to the United States with those skills, and they can't get a job using those skills because the places where they got their degrees are not considered to be sufficiently good enough, and so they end up doing shit jobs.
It would be interesting to see if that changes in the US specifically, because I feel like the quality of education is decreasing so much too that it'd be like, oh, well, if you went to Arizona State, like you're not going to be able to be a nurse at this hospital either. You need to go to a place that's better or whatever it might be. But it seems like there's some that the education system is struggling quite a bit. A couple, one more billionaire I wanted to get to, and one more in case we haven't sold you enough. I just wanted to one more time mention my boy Bernie Sanders, especially the day after the election, where this should have been electing whoever was going to replace him after 8 years of being a pretty decent president, I would have thought. And maybe it would have been Trump, who knows? But I think our country would be in a better place had we had 8 years of Bernie rather than four of Trump and four of Joe Biden and now four more of Trump. Jesus Christ. It's important to remember three people, as you would to say, three people own more wealth than the bottom half of the entire country. Say what you want about capitalism. I, of course, respectfully very much disagree with you if you are pro-capitalism. But it's fine. I understand not everybody's as radical as I am. But there is no universe where, let's think of a fun example, food, right? You're at a restaurant, you're sitting, and there's, 10 tables of people, and it's a all you can eat buffet, except half of the food goes to three people and the other half of the food is spot between well, you don't even have to say 350 million. What about just 30? What if you have 10 pieces of fried chicken and five of them go to three people and the other five go to 30 people? Like it's just absurd. It doesn't make sense. And
I
I want to
want
get,
to,
oh,
I want
please.
to, I want to segue since you were talking about people eating at a restaurant. I want to talk about the people who work at the restaurant
Mm,
and the
which they
fact,
talk about in the Bill Gates episode as well.
right, and the fact, for example, that restaurant workers have to live on tips, and because they get tips, their minimum wage is in the range of $2. And so they are completely dependent on tips. I mean, the fact that the federal minimum wage is only $7 an hour,
Criminal.
that comes to about $15,000 a year. Who can live on $15,000 a year? We need to have a living wage. That is another example of a kind of socialist practice that capitalists are opposed to. And they make the argument that, well, if we paid people a living wage, whatever that is, $25, $30 an hour, then we would have to raise our prices for everything. You wouldn't have to raise your prices because you're rolling in money. You know, the people who run General Motors are making 100 times more than the people who actually put the cars together. And if General Motors fails, those dudes will get a golden parachute. And even though they failed in their job, for which they should be fired with nothing, they get hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And I do want to say we've picked on General Motors like five times. I do want to just say it's nothing personal about General Motors. We could say the same thing about Ford or Buick or Chrysler or whatever these other big car
Everybody.
companies. Everybody. They're just it's one of the problems if you have a very common, easy, household name that it comes to mind quite easily, which I'm sure is very beneficial to their advertising. Don't
And
buy
that's
one of their cars.
and that's well, speaking of don't, how about don't buy a Tesla?
Right. Yeah. We haven't even gotten to your boy. But before we get to your
Mm.
boy, I want to really quickly, because I think most people listening to this will say, yeah, Oprah's a billionaire, but come on, it's Oprah. Like she started from the bottom, now she's here. Sexual abuse, black woman. She's got to be a good person. Look at her. She's Oprah. The one point I want to address other than again just think about the nature that she's a billionaire. Nobody needs to make it's not $1 million an hour, but something close to that. She doesn't have 200 billion, but she has a lot of that. So let's say she makes, if we cut that in half, I don't remember her net worth. Anyway, she makes insane. She makes like what a normal person, a normal American, which again, being an American already puts us, I think, in the top 5% globally from an income perspective. So if you got, we are already in an immensely, immensely privileged position just by nature of being born here and not being born anywhere in the global south. She makes like, probably what you make a year, a day, or a week, or whatever. Um,
Probably.
and doesn't give that money away, doesn't invest in other people. That's the thing that gets me. Why I think socialism could be so easy. And what I want to say, if I ever get to speak to Bill Gates, I don't know enough about his family and his children, but let's just play a game really quickly. Super quick thought experiment. Bill Gates has a child or a cousin or a friend who is fought in the Iraq war and had and it's horrible. Had their arms and legs blown off and had severe damage to their brain. They're still alive. They're still like the more or less the same old Jimmy. Let's call him Jimmy. Same old Jimmy. He still like loves his dog and loves to get outside. He wants to be alive, but he can't work. His brain has made it so that he can't really have a job. He doesn't have arms and legs, or whatever the example might be. I would think even somebody with less empathy, like a billionaire like Bill Gates, if he had a personal connection to this person, it's a cousin and it's a friend, whatever, I think Bill Gates would be like, you know what? I have enough money. I am just going to bankroll this person's life. Jimmy's a pretty simple man. He lives in a one bedroom studio apartment in a small town. It's not that much in rent. He doesn't eat all that fancy food very much. He doesn't like to go out very much. It's not that much money to me. It's a drop in the bucket. I'm just going to bankroll his life. I would be shocked if someone disagrees with if you had to do that. I think we do that all the time. Especially poor people. They have friends, cousins, neighbors who are struggling and they help them out. I don't see why if the money adds up, if we are able to, for example, pay $20 billion and lift everybody out of homelessness, why that's a bad thing. Why we don't want people doing that. And so to come back around to Oprah, generally, if you have that much money, you suck. Go bankroll some friends or some neighbors or some cousins or some people from your hometown who have the same experience as you, who are getting physically or sexually or emotionally abused, right? Go help them have talk shows or whatever. And then finally, I got this from somebody on Reddit, right? Oprah is not as good as we think. Who is like the most famous person who's ever been on Oprah? Dr. fucking Oz, that complete fraudulent of person who, best case scenario, Oprah didn't do, and I don't mean her specifically, her team didn't do enough background checking him, though it couldn't have been that hard because I'm pretty sure he's not even a doctor. He like just calls himself that. He's like some sort of healer kind of guy. And I've sort of removed myself from it.
Speaking of doctors, let's not forget Dr. Phil,
Right. Him
who
too.
also got his start from Oprah, and now he's a giganto Trump supporter.
Right. For lack of better words, a miserable prick, that man. Best case scenario, Oprah's team is really bad at vetting, but I think more importantly, and it's the thing, there's this. Did you see the Dr. Phil episode when he brings on the dude who dresses like him to make fun of him?
Yes.
You've seen that? Yeah, it's so fascinating. If you haven't seen that, Dr. Phil brings on the creator of Bum Fights, this man who would go pay homeless people like $3 to fight each other. Fucked up, obviously. But then Dr. Phil brings him on his show to like expose him, and the dude dresses like Dr. Phil, like he has hairs, who put on like a bald cap and wore a suit. And he's like, "You're doing the same thing as me. You are profiting off of people suffering. It's the same thing. Yes, mine is more crude, but it's the same fucking thing." I thought that that was so brilliant and genius that that man was able to do that. And so that's my point about Oprah. You're bringing on someone like Dr. Oz, who's not a doctor, whose remedies and things that he has suggested are wrong and unhealthy, but you brought him on to make money because you knew that he was going to be a clickbaity kind of person. He was able to get his own show. You're not doing good for the world. You're just trying to make fucking money. So
Yeah, but there's one thing you're forgetting about Oprah.
please.
She needs enough money to have a house in Chicago. She needs enough money to have a house in Santa Barbara where she can be neighbors with Harry and Meghan. And she needs to have enough money to have her estate in Hawaii.
And to travel private jets between those. I found this. I can't remember the source. I didn't write down the source. In 90 minutes, Dad, somebody like Oprah in 90 minutes emits more CO2 than one of us does our entire lifetime. That's the level of excess and disgusting bullshit that exists right now. And again, we're calling people out specifically, but it's not them. I know Oprah, like, I don't know Oprah. I wish I did. I'm sure she's lovely. I'm sure if I got invited to, I'm close-ish to Santa Barbara. I'm sure I'd have a beautiful time if I went to her home. I'm sure she makes really good food and has a really nice place and is really thoughtful and caring, loves her friends, loves her family. But this system cannot produce this, especially while we have so many people suffering and in poverty, dying unnecessarily due to structural violence for no reason other than this is the system that we have.
Exactly. We're starting to get to the end. I want to ask you one last question.
Lay it on me.
In the Bill Gates show, the question was raised about whether or not there should be a limit on billionaires. And I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I believe this is a direct quote from my boy Bernie Sanders when he said, "Fuck yeah, there should be a limit." I'm just kidding. He doesn't curse, I don't think. But yes, it's unethical. Nobody needs $1,000 million, or in the case of Jeff Bezos, 200,000. Which again, $200,000, I would take that gladly. If I went to my bank account and there was 200K in there, I would be set for quite some time. and would be donating lots of it to help out friends and family. He doesn't have $200,000. He has $200,000 million. It's absurd. So no. And that's one of the things Bernie calls Bill Gates on. Even if Bill Gates gave away 90% of his wealth, he'd still be a billionaire. So no, this shit has to go. If we want to keep capitalism, if people are like really into this whole capitalism thing, fine. No billionaires. Straight up. That just needs to be a rule. No billionaires. All of that money, if you're able to make that money, again, do the Mark Cuban thing. Make that fucking money. Go get your bag. Go get your bread. Kanye, who's a billionaire too. Go make your money. If people want to listen to that garbage music now, post graduation, and yes, post graduation, not Life of Pablo. I didn't like that either. Or Dark Twisted Fantasy. That one's okay, I guess. I won't go down a Kanye thing right now, but go
Please don't.
go make your money and then go pay your taxes so that you maybe have hundreds of millions, not thousands of millions. There's no need for it. And Oprah's houses, I'm sure we could go do some research right now. She doesn't need $1 billion for that shit. Three houses that are multi-millions. Okay, give 500
And
million,
and
half
she
a
might
billion.
she
She's
might have
fine.
more she might have more than three. I wouldn't
I'm
be surprised
sure, I'm
if she had
sure
one in Europe
I'm
someplace.
sure she probably has like 30 properties that sit vacant that are taking up huge swaths of land so that she can have like a nice garden when she flies over it in her helicopter or private jet or whatever. It's all bullshit. We don't need this. We have been taught since like the 1950s, or I think it's even earlier. I think it was World War One, not World War Two, that Americans need to buy stuff to stimulate the economy, which can still happen. Right now, this wealth is being hoarded and not being spent. People like to complain about reparations, and Dave Chappelle does a brilliant thing about reparations back in the Chappelle Show days. You get black people all whatever, $10,000 each. That money's going right into the economy tomorrow. That money's coming right back to a bunch of white businesses, to Newports and watermelon salesmen and Rolex and Nikes. Like, all that's going to do is stimulate the economy. It's not a bad thing. And that's obviously the joking thing. Hopefully, before any sort of reparations thing, we'd at the very least have some R.W.A. viewers that we could tell them, yo, save this money. At least save half of it. Buy your Newports, buy your shoes, but save half of that money.
Okay,
So
so
yeah, does that answer your question?
yeah, one last thing and make it relatively short.
Yes, sir.
Go back to the notion of optimism.
Yes. Well, then why don't I come back to the wild robot? And I'm going to say the quote again. Sometimes to survive, you must become more than you are programmed to be. Right now, we are programmed to be greedy, lying, cheating, stealing sons of bitches. And all we need to do is change this system, this structure that is imposed on us, that has been for hundreds of years. It's okay. We get it. It was necessary to get us out of feudalism. Capitalism has been great, but it's time to let capitalism go. It's time to hang it up and get a new jacket. The socialism jacket, a resource-based economy jacket, and put that shit on for a while. Just try it out. I think you're gonna like how it goes. And I am optimistic that one day we're gonna get there. And if not, I'm gonna die trying.
That is a good note to end on. So it has come to be that time. We hope once again that you've learned a thing or two and that you've even smiled. Let us end with our quote for the week. It's kind of wild that we do have billionaires. It's a huge amount of wealth, which, if you even tried to consume it, would be kind of absurd. You want that money to be given back to society, not just consumed. In a rich country like the US, the fact that there's still deprivation says that our social safety net is not as funded as we'd like it to be. And imagine, you might be surprised that that quote is from Bill Gates. Our song of the week is It's a Good Day to Fight the System by Shungudvo. For Pancho and Jesse, thanks for joining us on R.W.A. And as Bob Dylan said, we'll see you after a while.